Okay, so the first thing I need to do is create my analysis. Normally I'd have another sheet in this file for analysis, but I don't need to do that just yet because my pivot table will insert that for me. So with any cell selected in my table, I can click on the pivot table icon. It detects my range, and notice how it's called table 1. That's because this table has a name called table 1, and I'm going to insert it on a new worksheet. Now the first thing I want to do is rename this sheet, and I'll call it headline pivots, because these are the pivot tables that will be feeding my headline figures up here. Now I'm actually going to have a few pivot tables on this one sheet. Normally I wouldn't recommend that because as a pivot table grows, it can't overlap another pivot table. And so if you were to refresh your pivot tables and they needed to grow and overlap one another, they wouldn't refresh properly and your report would be incorrect. So I'm going to break that rule here, but that's because this is just a demonstration. So the first thing I want is my date. Now I want to group my dates into months, and it's automatically selected months by default, and I'll click OK. Now if your dates aren't formatted correctly, you can't use this grouping tool and you'll get an error, so you'll know. And that's what I was talking about here, where I said I fixed these dates so they're in the correct format for the purpose of grouping here. Alright, the next thing I need is my visit count, my sum of visitors, and my bouncers. So this information is information about the traffic to our website. So the sum of visitors, this is how many times people have visited our website. The visit count is the unique number of visitors to the website. So the fact that there is 10,000 visits but 20,000 visitors indicates that some people came back more than once, on average twice. The bouncers, this is where a person comes to your website, they visit one page and then they leave the site altogether. The objective generally with websites is to engage your visitor. So you want them to view more than one page. So if they're bouncing, if they're leaving after seeing just one page, then that's an indication of how engaging your website is. And so that's why it's an important metric. So the next thing we want to do is work out what the bounce rate is. And for that, we're going to insert a calculated field. And we'll call it bounce rate. Oh, if I could spell, bounce rate. In our formula, what we want is bounces divided by the visitors. So I'll click add and OK. And that's automatically put in for me. The next thing I want to do is just format that field so that the number format is a percentage, and I'll just leave it at no decimal places. Okay, so now we've got the information for our headline figures, we can go ahead and populate our dashboard. So our total visits is this figure here, and you can see Excel has automatically put in the get pivot data function, and that's great because as our pivot table grows, it will always pick up this grand total figure because it's saying it's going to pick up the sum of visitors on the pivot table that's on the headline pivots sheet, headline pivots, and that begins in cell A3. Okay, so we'll do our unique visitors, and that's this 10,000 figure. Now you notice I've put in a plus at the beginning of my formula, and that was just me being lazy. You don't have to start your formulas with an equal sign. If you do use a plus, then Excel will put the equals in for you, and I think that's a legacy feature coming over from Lotus 123. So I'll do this one properly. So total bounces is this figure here, and then my bounce rate is my percentage. Okay, so they're my headline figures. So you can see that all I've done to start building my dashboard is insert some formulas that reference my analysis in here. Now one more thing I should put in here is a label for this pivot table, just so that I know where these figures are used in my dashboard. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is build some pivot tables for my charts that I'm going to put in here. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is copy this pivot table and paste it just beside. Now remember, I don't recommend you put multiple pivot tables on the same sheet, because if they grow, if this were to grow, in a horizontal fashion, it could overlap this pivot table and then it will cause you problems. But I know in this case, my data is only ever going to grow vertically. As I add more data, I will have more rows of data in my pivot table. Okay, so the other reason to copy a pivot table is because when you use slicers, if you want one slicer to control multiple pivot tables, then every pivot table you want that slicer to control must share the same pivot cache. And the easiest way to ensure they all use the same pivot cache is to copy and paste them. Okay, now I just need to edit this pivot table. And for that, I only want my visit count and visitors. So I'm going to remove my bounce information. And then I can go ahead and insert a pivot chart. And we'll use a line chart because we're plotting data over time. So line charts are great for that purpose. They show the trend of data over time. I'm going to tidy up this chart a little bit. I'm going to hide all the field buttons on the chart. We'll make it in keeping with our theme, our colors, and I'll delete the legend. Now, what I'm going to do is move this chart to my dashboard sheet. So Control X to cut, go to my dashboard, Control V to paste it in. And I'm just going to move it into place roughly, and I'll resize it a little, grab the corner, and as I resize it, I'm holding down the Alt key, and that snaps it to the grid. So you can see this chart is perfectly aligned to the cells underneath. Now, I actually want to move it up a little bit, so I'm going to hold down Control while I click the outer edge, and now I can use my arrow keys to move it into place a little bit better. Okay, let's tidy it up a little bit more. I'm going to delete the grid lines. I want to format these lines. I don't want the markers. So I just double click on it. Now that works in Excel 2010 to open the Format Data Series dialog box. In Excel 2007, you have to right click and then choose Format Data Series. So let's fix our marker. We'll turn it off. And while we're there, we'll select the next line and we'll do the same. No markers. Okay, and close that. All right, now we can go ahead and build the charts for this other section. So we'll go back to our headline pivots and I'll copy this pivot table because it's already got my bounce information in that I want to keep, as opposed to copying this one which doesn't. So now I'm going to pull out my visit count and visitors, and then I'm going to copy it one more time. I'm going to paste it right beside. With this next chart, it's actually two charts. So I need two separate pivot tables for my bounce information. So in my first one, I'm going to pull out my bounce rate. And in this one, I'm going to pull out my bounces. Okay, so now I've just got two small pivot tables ready to use for my pivot charts for the bounce information. So let's go ahead and create a pivot chart. And we'll do another line chart, change the formatting, get rid of that legend. I'm also going to get rid of my header, get rid of my field buttons. I can do lots of formatting, doesn't matter where you format it. Now I'm going to Control X, go back here, Control V to paste it in, hold down Alt while I move it into place. Now I'm just going to close that because I don't need it anymore. Now the other thing I want to do is, because I've actually got two very small charts here, the first one for my bounces goes at the top. So let's get rid of those markers, none. And the other thing I want to do is I want to move these axis labels to the top, because these two charts are going to share the axis labels. Because they follow, or because they have the same axis labels, I don't need to repeat them twice. It's just adding more clutter to my dashboard, which is already a cramped space. So let's format my axis. And I want no tick mark, and I want my labels high, and that will move them to the top. So I'll click close. Right, let's go ahead and insert the next pivot chart. And all you have to do is select the pivot table you want to insert a pivot chart for, and then pivot chart. Again, it will be a line chart. Get rid of the legend and the heading and the lines, and I'll fix the color of that in a moment. So I'm going to hide the field buttons, Control X, Control V. Okay, let's move this into place. And we're going to have to make it quite a lot smaller now. I'm holding down Alt while I resize it, and then Control to select the outer edge, which then lets me use my arrow keys. The next thing I want to do is I need to change this line color. I want to maintain the theme of my dashboard. I don't want to go too mad with my colors, but I also want to be careful to not use the same color for two different types of data. So this is my bounce rate. So I want to choose an orange color, and I want to choose one that's different to any that we've used before. And I think I'll use that dark orange. Okay, so this one is a bit similar to this one. We might change that as well. And notice I'm just on the pivot chart tools in the format tab, and I'm choosing shape outline, which might seem a bit strange because it's a line, but that's the one you choose as opposed to shape fill. All right, let's see, what have we got? Too pale, we haven't got a lot of choice. We'll use this orange here, there we go. Okay, so now I have my two charts in. I can get rid of this axis. I don't want to delete it, I'm just going to hide it. Format, so I want no tick marks and no labels. And click close. So now what we need to do is probably move this over a little just to align it with the chart above. That way the points on this line will match the points on this line and we'll be able to share that axis. Now the reason I've created two separate charts here is because the scale for this is between 0 and 1, or 0% and 100%. And the scale for this is more like between 0 and 2000. If I were to put this line in this chart, it would literally be a flat line along the bottom there. You wouldn't be able to see it at all. And so one option is to plot this line on the secondary axis. But actually I prefer to plot it in its own chart, because when you start adding a secondary axis, it can sometimes be confusing to know which axis relates to which line. And so it just slows down the interpretation of the chart. And I just find that this is much clearer. Okay, one more thing I want to do is actually hide these axis lines. And because they're hard to select now, I'm going to go up to the format, and then in here I can choose my horizontal axis, and then I can right click format axis, and with the line I don't want to see the line at all, so I'll close that. And I'll do the same for this one. Let's see, I can also arrow through the different elements in my chart to select them. Right click, format axis, and line, no line. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is put in a legend. Remember that I deleted my legend initially, and that's because I haven't got a lot of room on my chart itself. So what we're going to do is make a manual legend, and we'll use the shapes to do that. So I'll just choose this straight line. Now I'm going to draw the line, but while I draw it, I'll hold down Shift, and that will just force the line to go completely straight, and I don't need a very long line, so that will do. I'm going to change the color to match these colors in my chart. So that one will be for my unique visitors. And let's just make the weight of this line a bit fatter. Okay, and I'll drag it down into place, and then I can just use my arrow keys. Okay, so that's my unique visitors. Now I've got my line and I've formatted it a bit thicker than the default. I can hold down Control. You can see the little plus sign appears, and then I can drag it. While I'm dragging, I'm going to click Shift as well so that I can't get it in the wrong place, and let go. Now it's a little bit wide, so I might make it a bit narrower, so let's make it 0.6. Okay. Right, now all I need to do is change the color to match my chart. Let's make this one a bit narrower as well, 0.6. Okay, and I'll just use my arrow keys to move it. Now I'm going to copy it and repeat. Total bounces, that is my yellowy colored line, or light orange, and then my bounce rate is my brown color. Okay, so now I've made a legend using the shapes on the Insert tab, and that's just saved me some precious real estate in my dashboard. And the next thing I want to do is just format these charts a bit nicer. And the other thing, before I do that, I've got to turn these grid lines off, they're driving me nuts. Okay, now it's a bit clearer. Let's see, we'll move this down a little. and this one. Okay, now I'll make this one a little bit bigger. Actually, yeah, I'll make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay, I'm just manually shifting it about. You can, if you want to, format it using the tools, and if you go up to the Format tab, I can change the height and size of it if I want to be really precise. Now, I'm going to tone down the border on these charts. So I'm going to choose Shape Outline, and then I'll just use these slightly paler greys. And as you go through them, you'll see a preview in the chart, so you can figure out what color you want. Okay, now I've done one, I'm going to select the next one and press F4 and F4 again, and that just applies it to all of my charts. So I've chosen my formatting once, and then all I had to do was press the F4 key. So let's do the same for the font. Oh, I don't want it red. Let's go with a grey. Same for my vertical axis, and that one, and that one. So you can see the F4 key is your secret weapon in making formatting fast. Okay, so our dashboard's starting to come together. I've toned down the headings and labels on my charts so that my lines are the most important information. I've used colours that are in keeping with my theme. I've chosen these oranges and browns because that's the color scheme for Google Analytics. I've linked this data to my headline pivot. So you can see that these charts are just regular charts in a regular sheet, and I've just arranged them in a way that it's easy to see them on one page.